Well, it's wonderful to have everyone here today. And I've been thinking about how I haven't really been talking much about what's happening in the world lately during this time, this program. And I think it's about time to refer to that because there's so much that people are finding challenging and disturbing. After all, how do you apply the Dhamma to this? Really is what might be coming up in our minds. And there's a lot of concern that people have for people we know, or maybe even or for ourselves in this current political environment. Really noticing uncertainty around the place that people have in this society, immigrants and maybe people who are LGBTQ plus, identifying in that way, or just how people are faring in various positions in our society. And then of course we also have the news of the wildfires and the storms and the crazy weather and the obvious demonstrations of climate chaos and climate change. And so a lot of things to upset the mind, and rightly so. It's really challenging. So in thinking about, all of that, of course, is part of our conventional reality. And it's not to be brushed away, right? Because we live in this world and we practice in this world, and we develop ourselves in this world. And it's important for us to apply the Dhamma here and now. So how do we do it? And one of the things that one of the things that came up in the sharing as people were checking in this morning is really bringing up a lot of metta. And also I would suggest karuna, especially as we see the challenges that these changes are bringing to the lives of people around us or to our own. So these are all, important. It's important to practice in this way. And I feel like whenever things get difficult, and there's always this kind of change, and on the large scale, these kinds of cultural and political, social swings from, respecting everyone and wanting to include everyone, to tightening down and setting people outside of the protection. This kind of thing is historically just, ebbs and flows, unfortunately. I mean, certainly from the perspective of the Dhamma, the kinds of things that people are discriminated against, the Buddha said, this is not what defines or determines one's nobility at all. The characteristics of the body, or one's social standing, or how society labels us, or how we identify with various characteristics, until we get to morality or the developments of the mind in the practice. Those things really set people apart. Someone, excuse me, someone realizes the true nature of reality and sees beyond the duality of conventional reality, then they're definitely apart from the defilements. When the defilements are gone, there's definitely a nobility there. And as we develop on the path, the more we can purify our moral conduct and our virtue and develop our qualities of love and kindness and compassion and equanimity and joy, appreciation, gratitude, all of those wonderful things that we all agree on. It doesn't even matter what religion. Human beings know what brings peace and happiness, what brings safety and security, and what tears it apart. So when things are being torn apart, it's important to lean far the other way. Recently, a bhikkhuni friend of ours recommended a film that just came out, Conclave. I don't know if anybody here has seen it. It's about choosing a new pope, so it's very relevant, holy life kind of material. So this bhikkhuni friend recommended it and even made it possible for us to be able to watch it. And I found it really interesting. And there were 2 lines in the film. I'm not going to give away anything. I think you might want to see it. But there were 2 lines in the film that really struck me. And it was part of a homily sermon that was being given and reflection. And it was, certainty is the enemy of unity. And certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance. And I thought this was really worth reflecting on. And the certainty is being so sure somebody else is wrong. And it reminds me of some things that I've heard, like about Ajahn Chai. He would say things like, right but not true, true but not right. Like in a situation where I think one of the times was when the monks, Ajahn Chah was away and the monks had come to a conclusion that one of the monks there was just impossible to live with for whatever reasons. And they really could see a lot of things that were worthy of criticism, and they decided as a collective that they should send him packing. And when Ajahn Chah came back, he didn't agree with that opinion at all. And this is where, like maybe all of their criticisms were valid, but then is it still the right thing to do? And it's like sometimes, it's hard to know. But this idea of certainty being the enemy of unity, this is really interesting. And we see so much division in our culture now. And it's not just in America. I mean, this kind of movement towards a more rigid, authoritarian type of social order is happening throughout the world, various places. And my sense is that it's related to climate change. I think as the climate gets more difficult to tolerate, people are moving around more. As the more you have large numbers of people trying to get away from intolerable conditions, the more stress it puts on various social situations and government and so on. And I think that this clamping down and shutting out of people is partly related to that whole change that's happening in our climate. But regardless whether that's true or not, what we're seeing and what we're experiencing tells us that as Dhamma practitioners, we need to lean in the other direction. We need to look at the places where we're not tolerant and see if we can develop that tolerance. And, you know, the Buddha was so clear about what we should be tolerant of and what we shouldn't be tolerant of. So, you know, killing, stealing, lying, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, these are not the things we can forgive, and we can help rehabilitate, and we can rehabilitate ourselves. And it's not like mistakes set us outside in and of themselves, but he was not, there's like a kind of a zero tolerance, if you will, of that kind of behavior. And it's because of the karmic results. So the Buddha wasn't, you know, kind of moralistic about it, judgmental in that way. He would just point out, well, what's the result of this? What is the cause of suffering? These things really cause a lot of suffering for oneself and for the people around us. And if we can live in a way that we don't kill anything, we don't take anything that isn't meant for us, we don't commit any kind of sexual, we don't have any sexual activity that would harm or make someone uncomfortable or diminished in any way, or anything that would hurt the people around us, or our other family members or whatever. If we avoid all of that, we're truthful and not divisive, and not malicious, and not harsh, and not frivolous in our speech. You know, all these like developments of virtue, and avoiding those harmful activities. This leads to a beautiful result, and we're safe. You know, we're safe. And there was another thing that I read. It was an article in the Atlantic magazine, which I happen to have a subscription for because of some somewhat sweet offering. But it's not, most of the articles are just like, yeah, that doesn't matter. But this one was interesting because it's saying that, you know, we've really become, society has really changed in the last 70 years. So I'm about to be 71. And in my lifetime, I've seen a fair bit of this kind of change. And what they say is that we've become socially isolated more and more over the decades. And it didn't just start with the pandemic. It started long before that. And I can remember when I was growing up that my family would have other families over to visit, and couples that my parents spent time with, and we would go out together with other families and do activities, you know, water skiing or hiking, canoeing, or, you know, there was my immediate family, and then there was our extended family, and then there was a community that we lived in. And the community was very interactive. You go to church every Sunday, you're with a community, someone dies in the community, everybody shows up, you have a meal together, you know, and when people would have trouble, then there are plenty of people around to help. And then, you know, they were saying in this article, and with a number of studies that they would cite, that things have really changed. And they say that the change has a lot to do with television and automobiles. You know, like we can drive further, so we live further out, or, you know, I don't know how much the automobile, I mean, you know, back back in the ancient, before the Earth's crust cooled, like when I was a child, it was, there was a lot, you could drive and a lot, but what they said is that these, especially television, really caused people to stay at home and be entertained at home. And of course, in the last 60 years or so, even 30 years or 40 years, it's become increasingly available to be entertained in your home. So they had a few, I'm going to read them to just make sure I get them right here. It's like some of these specific statistics or observations, they say that this trend, like I said, didn't just start with the pandemic. It started long before that. And they said since the early 2000s, the time that Americans spend helping and caring for people outside their nuclear family has declined by more than a third. So we're just not as engaged with the wider community around us in that way. They say that men who watch television watch TV for 7 hours compared to 1 hour of being with people outside their home. This is kind of what they found in their studies. They say a typical female pet owner spends more time actively engaged with her pet than in face-to-face time with friends. And this is like, it's a gradually increasing isolation that people since the early, since compared with 2003, so the last, 22 years, Americans are more likely to take meetings at home, to eat at home, to shop at home, to be entertained at home, and even to worship at home. And of course, this isn't all bad because we've got so much available to us. Look at this community, we're all over the place and we get together. But I also see really sweet things in this community of people getting to meet each other in person, even if we live far apart. And there's a special joy in it, like when we went to Thailand and Winmi came along and Adrian came along and different times. And, like we get to see you. There are some people that, like here on the West Coast, sometimes people will drive through and visit some of the community members along the way. And this is all really, really sweet. But it also suggests to me that in this time of great division and where it feels like there's so much kind of demonstration of certainty, being certain that people who don't think the way we do are wrong, that we don't even have an opportunity to really get to know each other well enough to see where those attitudes are coming from. What they said in this article was that some of the things that are happening, because of this change in the way that we live, is that people are spending more time with their children, which is great, more time with your immediate family, and that we have this wonderful, broader, bigger kind of opportunity to engage with people who have similar interests to ours, like we're seeing in the KBP community. So they said that's really like, you have your immediate family. Let me see, what did they call it? Your immediate family connections. And then that distant thing with people that share the same views and interests as we do is really our tribe. but that what's missing, kind of disappeared is the village. So like the village I grew up in, we don't have that sense of community. We're not going to the PTA meetings so much and working it out with our neighbors how to do things. And so we don't get to really connect in a way that we can have really develop more tolerance. The article said that families teach us love, tribes teach us loyalty, and the village teaches us tolerance. Coming back to that, certainty being the deadly enemy of tolerance. And so, like, how do we develop more tolerance? And how do we come to really affect each other in coming back to something more balanced? And I'm not putting the responsibility on each of us individually. There's only so much we can do. But it's good to have the mindset of being willing to do it, even if it's just to spend a little more time in a way of being engaged in our community. And this is especially going to be valuable if we have a disaster. We find it really enjoyable to interact with our neighbors up there in the mountains. Even the ones that are a little scary. One of our close neighbor next door, we've gotten to know him pretty well. Really great guy from San Diego, surfer dude, but a very skilled carpenter. And he said, yeah, that saying, you hold your friends close, but you hold your enemies closer. The more we know people, the more we can be prepared for the ways in which we might have to intervene in something. And there's also the great opportunity to influence each other in a positive way, hopefully. So, like, how does this relate to the Dhamma? Well, the Dhamma is full of skills and ways of looking at things that help us put things in a wholesome perspective. Things change. America has been considered to be a great superpower for some time now. It's inevitable that it won't be at some point. Maybe this is the way it changes. Instead of spending our life energy being afraid or sad or resentful or angry, we can spend it developing our ability to be present with the way it is. We always have to turn towards the suffering first and foremost, the dukkha, the disappointment, the dissatisfaction, the fear, the anxiety, whatever it is, whatever form the dukkha takes, first and foremost, we need to accept this is the way it is right now. This is the way it is. And then when we process that feeling through our systems, we can see things more clearly with more wisdom because we're not caught up in it. That's the key. How do we let go? How do we let go of this idea of me as a separate self in this dangerous world where I need to protect this thing that actually ultimately doesn't really exist? So the Dhamma is working on the conventional level. How do we live in the world in harmony and peace with respect for people? And at the same time, how do we transcend that by seeing the truth of everything in this conventional reality being impermanent and inherently dukkha, and nothing that we can claim to be ourselves or our own. And if we can really, like, on a moment by moment basis, step back enough and go silent enough to recognize the truth of that, then when we observe what's happening in conventional reality in the world around us, we don't have to be afraid. It's been a long time now, but the memory of it is super clear as a realization that I had, an insight that arose, that there's only one thing we need to fear, and that's wrongdoing. It's the only thing we need to fear. We don't have to fear any of the stuff that happens with our climate, with our culture, with our society, with people. It's our own actions that we should be watching carefully, because that's what brings the barriers to our awakening, our full freedom. So if that's the only thing to fear, and I wish for that realization for everyone, because it's through insight, it's through realizing for ourselves, seeing the Dhamma directly. This is, what the Buddha said, this is the Dhamma, is to be seen directly here and now, individually, because that's how we know it. Like when I can feel it in my being, that when I say this, because I know it for myself, it rings so true. When I listen to Ajahn Sumedho talking about ultimate reality and really understanding what he's calling pure consciousness, or he uses these things as synonyms: nibbana, Dhamma, even mindfulness, pure consciousness, the knowing, the knower, however you want to whatever label you want to put on it, it's not going to describe it. But he can tell by the way he sounds, by the way he's talking, he knows that himself through his own insight. That's when you can really feel the authenticity and really develop faith. And so this is what each of us has available to us. This is what, without thinking, okay, that kind of understanding is so far away. Not really. It's here and now. And so we don't want to waste this amazing opportunity of having this life force, this consciousness in us, because if we say we're anything, we can't really, there's no self, separate self. If we say we're anything, it's that consciousness, that conscious awareness, that awareness of the way things actually work. We don't want to waste this opportunity worrying about stuff we have no control over. So we listen to the news, okay, want to have a little bit of an idea of what's going on. But if it's beyond our control, bringing up metta, bringing up empathy, bringing up care and concern for people who are adversely affected, and stepping back and bringing in as much as possible the reflections of truth and the way things actually are. Because the ups and downs and the cycles of peace and prosperity and chaos and violence and corruption and disruption, this is just going to go on, forever, as long as there's greed, hatred, and delusion. So, we get to make some decisions about how much we engage. even when we're in the thick of it. Like I heard stories about people helping each other, in the midst of the fires in LA and the aftermath. One man who has a pickup truck who's been for free hauling stuff for people all over the place, telling people, you need anything hauled, goods, supplies, taking things away, bringing things in, you just let me know. He's doing it all for free. And it's like, this is what human beings can do, and what many of us do in the face of challenge, adversity, and crisis. And that these kinds of actions and these kinds of attitudes really help us develop in the Dhamma. Instead of discrimination, anger, fear, resentment, intolerance. What we think and how we spend our time matters. Because there's karma that gets created even with our thoughts, our mental states, our attitudes. Because what we think comes out eventually into the world through our speech, through our actions. And when we make that mind beautiful, loving, supportive of human beings, all living beings, kind, compassionate. When we continually guide our mind to let go of its fears, of its anxiety, of its self-concern, it brings that beautiful energy into the world. I was just remembering someone who's present here today was telling us recently about a monk in Thailand who could see auras, and a young teenage girl who could also see auras. And they could look at a person and they could see brightness, or they could see like a dark area or something. Even if we can't like see those things, what would your aura look like? How bright is it? How much shadow is in there? We can observe in ourselves where the aversion is. And it's not like you want to squash it or try to like get rid of it. That doesn't work. It's like, because there's more aversion there, like wanting to get rid of our anger, resentment, fear, anxiety. That's not the way. But to be turning towards it and going, oh, okay, this is how that is. This is how that feels. If we're present with it, it starts to dissolve. We can use our patience, our endurance to stay present with it until it diminishes and completely falls away. Ajahn Sumedho told a really beautiful story about this when he was when he first became a Samanera in Thailand. He spent a year in a kuti just meditating by himself. And he said the first 3 days were great. It's like, could just like practice. And, he's there alone and not bothered by anyone. But then he said this anger was coming up in him. And he said he just had this anger was so strong, and it lasted for a long time. Like, I don't know, I can't remember. Did say like 3 months or something?
Yeah.
3 months of just feeling. And he said for some reason he had endurance, or he did not give up. He did not stop. He did not leave the place. All he had to do, he was practicing in his kuti, sitting and walking meditation, and they would bring him his meal. Someone would bring him his food. And he said he just sat with this feeling of anger. And he said, he was like 31 years old, and in his upbringing, he wasn't allowed to, anger wasn't accepted. You weren't allowed to express it. It was suppressed. All this suppressed anger was coming up. And he said, and that's how he learned to observe it, to be the witness of this feeling. And for whatever reason, he was willing to stay present with it through all that months. And then he said, one morning he woke up and there was no anger, and he had so much joy. Everything was so bright, and he thought he was enlightened, which didn't turn out to be quite yet at that time. But it's like this is what we can do for ourselves. We allow the feelings. We don't add to it. We don't think about the instances in our life that bring that anger up and encourage it, but we just stay with the feeling. This is what we need to do with whatever feelings arising. Until we get to the place, like the Buddha, who said, a feeling's just a feeling. I don't have to get wrapped up in it. And Ajahn Sumedho says, now he's 90, friends die, you feel the loss, you feel grief. But it's like this. I love the way he says that. It's like this. In the silence of the mind, you're just present with it beyond words. When you feel it, but you're not in it, not consumed by it, not drawn down by it. And this is what we need to do with regard to the world. We live here. We operate on a conventional level in a way that brings good or brings the opposite. And that's up to us. And then we feel the results of that, whatever we do, we make karma. But we also have this ultimate reality, which is the truth of the Dhamma right here and now present for us to observe and to know directly. So I'll, as Longpa Sumedho says, offer that for your reflection. And I'd love to know if there are any comments or questions. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah. Thanks. I thought that was quite valuable talk, and I was I listened a little bit to the Episcopal bishop who spoke before the inauguration and was encouraging compassion, and has since been quite violently attacked. But I mean, not physically, but
yeah,
yet. But she's got a book on the book sale list, How We Learn to Be Brave, Decisive Moments in Life and Faith. That I think it's one of those places where Buddhism and Christianity kind of mesh pretty well. And I'll stick a link to it in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I heard some of what she said, and I thought, what a brave person to deliver that message right there in the midst of those who are at the head of this. And yeah, it's true. I mean, Ajahn Gana, Ajahn Sumedho, they talk too about how all religions have the same intention. They all have the same purpose. We have, some different beliefs around things, but it's really trying to point to ultimate reality. And there's this thing that we know as human beings, um, around courage and kindness and correctness, what's right, what's,
Mm-hmm.
and even when I say, like right and wrong, I mean, Ajahn Pasano told me that Ajahn Chah would say Dhamma is above evil and beyond good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way in which every holy person embracing what we would call a holy life is leaning into that understanding. And Ajahn Ganha said, if people are, you know, religion in their religion, they're fighting with other people. They're not. It's not the true religion.
Mm-hmm.
There's really only one true religion, and we can embrace whatever people are operating under, whatever label, whatever philosophy. It's bigger
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah. And it's really kind of a visceral feeling you get when when you're doing something good and
Yeah,
speaking right. And yeah, thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Steve. And
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, I mean, the word that comes to mind, which is a British word, is gobsmacked. Maybe the Americans have heard about gobsmacked, but I just feel like that was, I just so appreciate that. Um, and I think it was Bhikkhu Bodhi who wrote a letter about the tragedy in Gaza, certainly one of the senior monastics, and yet was castigated, um, and pulled animosity. So it's like the Episcopalian bishop, and then it really comes back down to what am I going to do, and part of that is really clear. Working with the Dharma, but the other part is living with uncertainty of the world for the kids that are coming along, my grandkids. So, I appreciate deeply. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, there's a lot that's worthy of compassion. There's a lot that we see the pain, the suffering, the struggle. If we let the mind go out into the future, there is always fear and worry. And of course, we look to the future on a practical level, we have to sometimes, but we need to guard the mind to some degree to remember that we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now. We don't really know what's going to happen. And we need to remember that. And the more we can be an example to our young people and show them the way to goodness and, um, I mean, our example is the best way. But get to a point where telling them doesn't work at all. But to be an example for them, so that at some point when they're um, being challenged, they'll have a memory of a good way to address it. Thank you, Anne. Cynthia?
I'll be quick because I know it's getting to the end. I just appreciated so much that little story about Sumedo talking about spending 3 months or something sitting in meditation, noticing a, um, can't remember the word.
Yeah, The anger.
the anger, because it was so helpful, because I was thinking about the what's happening with me and the unpleasant physical feeling, and then there's this part of me that's how I'm emotionally feeling about it, about it's depressing and it's discouraging and da da da, and that possibility of like, okay, I can notice and be aware of my feelings about it, but that doesn't, the physical stuff may continue for a long time, but that possibility that I don't have to continue the same emotional feelings about it. I can just notice it, watch it, and at some point it might just disappear. Who knows?
Yes. Yes.
So that was,
yes.
yes, yes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Cynthia. It's wonderful. Okay, friends.